The cleaning lady who said no to a millionaire CEO and changed her life forever. Before we begin the story, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from? And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Brian Walker, a millionaire, heir to a massive investment empire, and owner of an ego the size of the city, sat bored while flipping through a stack of resumes. His team had just hired a new employee, Mila Lester. But Brian didn't care. Employees came and went like guests at his parties. The next morning, something unusual happened. Brian woke up earlier than usual, which was rare, and went down to the living room. As he opened the door, he froze. There she was, Mila, on her knees on the white marble floor, scrubbing a stubborn stain with such focus it looked like she was fighting a battle against the cleaning product. Brian cleared his throat, waiting for her reaction. Mila looked up for just a second and said simply, "Good morning, Mr. Walker," then went straight back to work, as if he were just anyone. Brian blinked, confused. That's it? No smile? No wide-eyed look at the view from the 50th floor? Nothing? It threw him off. He was used to being treated like a movie star. Instead, he was ignored like a living room lamp. He straightened up, flashed his best practiced smile, and walked over with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. "So you're the new hire, right?" He began in a charming tone. "Must be amazing to work here. This penthouse was featured in magazines, you know?" Mila paused her scrubbing and raised one eyebrow, totally unfazed. "To me, a dirty floor is a dirty floor, whether it's in a magazine cover penthouse or a basement in Queens." Brian stood speechless for a moment, then let out a forced laugh. "Wow, you're direct. I like that." He leaned in a little, like he was telling a secret. "Did you know this marble was imported from Italy? It cost a fortune." Mila glanced at the floor, then looked at him. "Interesting. Want me to scrub it in Italian, or is English fine?" Brian's eyes widened. For the first time in a long while, someone wasn't just ignoring him. They were matching him word for word. And it didn't stop there. He moved in a bit closer, crossing his arms and casually showing off his expensive watch. "Well, it's not every day you meet someone like me, Mila." She gave a half smile, dry and ironic. "Oh, sure. A millionaire who doesn't know where his own towels are. Super rare." Brian burst out laughing, genuinely surprised. Normally that kind of remark would annoy him, but coming from her, it felt different. Sharp, funny, and real. No flattery, just honesty. He decided to go all in. "Listen, tomorrow there's a charity event at a 5-star hotel. Live music, important people, top-shelf champagne." He leaned a bit closer, confident. "I'd love for you to be my date." Mila put down the cleaning brush, stood up slowly, and looked him straight in the eyes. "Mr. Walker, I'm not an accessory to show off at parties. And expensive champagne doesn't change the fact that, at the end of the day, it's still just bubbly water." Brian stood there, stunned. She had just turned him down, without blinking. Mila picked up the bucket, straightened up, and walked away, calmly returning to her task as if nothing had happened. Brian, on the other hand, remained frozen, in shock. He wasn't used to hearing the word no, especially not from someone who cleaned his floors, but instead of upsetting him, it lit a spark. A mix of curiosity and fascination. "Who is this woman?" he thought. "And how is it possible that, for the first time, I want to win someone over and have no idea how to do it?" He smiled to himself, shaking his head. The game had just begun. Brian spent the whole morning trying to stop thinking about Mila. But it was no use. Every time he walked by the spotless marble she had cleaned, he remembered that sharp line about champagne being just water with bubbles. No one had ever summed up his life so bluntly and so cleverly. Around 2 in the afternoon, he found her in the library. Mila had her back turned, organizing books that probably cost more than her entire salary, but she handled each one like it was from a neighborhood public library. "So," Brian leaned on the doorframe, trying to sound casual. "Do you really think I'm the kind of guy you should stay away from?" Mila didn't even turn around. "Mr. Walker, you're exactly the kind of man I crossed the street to avoid." Ouch. Brian chuckled, more surprised than offended. That went straight to the heart. It wasn't meant for the heart. It was for the ego. Mila finally turned, holding a book on philosophy Brian had never touched. "The difference is the heart you take care of. The ego, you deflate." Brian shook his head, smiling in spite of himself. "You have an answer for everything, don't you?" "I have an honest answer for everything." "That's different." She went back to the books, but Brian didn't leave. He kept watching how Mila worked. There was no rush, no sloppiness. Every movement was precise and respectful. It was as if she found dignity in any task. "Why do you avoid me?" he insisted, genuinely curious. Mila sighed, putting a volume of Shakespeare back on the shelf. "Because men like you think money solves everything. You think you can buy people, feelings, situations." She looked straight at him. "And when you can't, you get confused like something in the world is broken." Brian stayed quiet for a moment. There was too much truth in those words. "What if I'm not like that?" "But you are." Mila gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The difference is that now you're curious about someone who isn't impressed by your make-believe world." She picked up the cleaning supply basket and headed to the door. Brian followed her. "Where are you going now?" "Home. My shift here is over." "And are you doing anything after that?" Mila stopped and looked at him like he was a child asking obvious questions. "After that, I go to my other job, Mr. Walker. Some people need two to pay the bills." She left, leaving Brian alone with his thoughts. That night, something strange happened. Brian couldn't concentrate on anything. Not the meeting with the Japanese investors, not the dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. His mind kept going back to Mila and her sharp answers. In the following days, he started to notice things he had never seen before. How Mila always arrived 15 minutes early. How she brought her lunch wrapped in aluminum foil instead of ordering expensive food like the others. How her clothes were simple but always spotless. One morning, Brian decided to leave home earlier. He didn't admit it to himself, but he wanted to bump into Mila as she got to work. The coincidence worked. He saw her getting off a bus 3 blocks from the building, walking quickly down the sidewalk. "Mila," he called, waving. She stopped, clearly not eager to talk. "Mr. Walker, you're out early today." "Actually, I was, going to get some coffee," he lied shamelessly. "Want a ride?" "Thanks, but I really need the walk." Mila adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "Poor people's workout, as my mom says." "Your mom?" Brian was genuinely interested. Mila hesitated, like she had revealed more than she meant to. "She's fine. We need to get going, Mr. Walker. Work doesn't wait." But Brian had caught the hesitation. Something was going on. Over the next few days, he started watching Mila more closely. He noticed that sometimes she looked far too tired for someone her age. He noticed how often she checked her phone, always with a worried face. And he noticed that sometimes she left work in a rush, like it was an emergency. Intrigued, and for the first time genuinely concerned about someone else, Brian decided to find out what was going on. Not out of nosy curiosity, but because of something he couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, he followed her quietly. He saw Mila take 2 buses until she arrived at a much simpler neighborhood in Queens. She entered an old but well-kept building. Half an hour later, she came out again, this time wearing a diner uniform. Brian stood still on the street and processing what he had just seen. 2 jobs. She really did work 2 jobs, but it didn't stop there. The next week, he found out she also went to school at night. Business administration at the local university. Brian was impressed. How could someone work that much and still study? Then he found out about her mother. One Thursday afternoon, Brian saw Mila leaving work in a hurry, more worried than usual. He followed her again, this time to a hospital in the Bronx. From a distance, he watched her talk to a nurse, clearly upset. When Mila left the hospital, she was crying silently. Brian felt something strange in his chest. He didn't know what it was, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to help someone without expecting anything in return. The next day, he called his personal accountant. "James, I need you to pay some medical bills for me." "Of course, Mr. Walker. Whose bills?" Brian gave him Mila's mother's name and the hospital. He asked for full discretion. No one should know where the money came from. He thought he had done something good, a kind, generous gesture. 2 weeks later, Mila knocked on his office door. The expression on her face was not good. "We need to talk, Mr. Walker." Brian looked up from his papers, pretending to be surprised. "Of course, come in, have a seat." Mila closed the door and remained standing, arms crossed. "You paid my mom's bills. It wasn't a question. It was a statement." Brian tried to keep a straight face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Mila walked closer to the desk. "The hospital called and said an anonymous benefactor had paid everything. It took me 2 days of digging to find out it was you." Brian sighed, giving up the act. "So what? You needed help, and I helped." "The problem," Mila placed her hands on the desk, leaning forward, "is that I didn't ask for your help, and especially I didn't ask for your pity. It wasn't pity, it was..." It was what? She interrupted. Charity? An investment to impress me? What exactly do you want from me, Mr. Walker? Brian was speechless. For the first time, he didn't know how to respond. I saw you were going through a hard time and you decided to fix my life with money. Mila stepped back from the desk. Exactly like I said men like you do. Mila, wait. No, she raised her hand. You don't get it, do you? I work hard, I study at night, I take care of my mother, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud I can support my family through my own effort. And you came in and stepped all over that. Brian stood up, truly confused. I was only trying to help. No, Mr. Walker, you were trying to feel important. You wanted to be the hero who saves the poor girl. Mila shook her head. That's not help. That's ego pretending to be kindness. For the first time in his life, Brian Walker felt truly small. Not small in wealth or status, but small as a person. Mila, He stopped, searching for the right words. I'm sorry, I didn't think that. No, you didn't think at all. But there was something different in Mila's tone now. Less anger, more disappointment. Do you know the difference between helping and controlling, Mr. Walker? Brian shook his head. Helping is asking what the person needs. Controlling is deciding for them. They stood in silence for a moment. Brian, for the first time, found himself forced to take a hard look at his own intentions. If you really want to prove you've changed, Mila said, heading for the door, prove it with actions, not with checks. She walked out, leaving Brian alone with a completely new feeling, the sense that he had truly done something wrong and wanted, desperately, to make it right. Over the next 3 days, Brian couldn't stop thinking about Mila's words. Prove it with actions, not with checks. Simple, direct, and devastating. He, who had always solved everything with money, now had to figure out how to be a different kind of man. On Thursday morning, Brian made a decision his millionaire friends would consider completely crazy. He was going to try living one day like a regular person, like Mila. He woke up early, sent the driver home, and left the house wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. No $50,000 watch, no Italian suit, just Brian Walker trying to be Brian. The first challenge appeared on the corner, the subway. Brian looked at the station entrance like an explorer facing an unknown cave. He had never gone down those steps in his life. He followed the crowd, trying to blend in, but was clearly lost. At the turnstile, he froze, literally. He stood there holding the subway card he'd just bought, unsure where to tap it. "Hey, tourist!" shouted a guy behind him. "Just tap the card and go through." Brian blushed, did as told, and finally made it in. The train was packed. He looked around for an empty seat, but they were all taken. So he stood, gripping a metal rail, swaying awkwardly with every turn. An elderly lady next to him smiled. "First time on the subway, dear? Is it that obvious?" Brian asked, embarrassed. "Just a little." She chuckled. "You look like a penguin trying to fly." When he finally arrived at work, Brian was sweating and his hair was a mess. Mila saw him entering the lobby and her eyes widened. "Mr. Walker, you look different today." "I took the subway," he said, as proud as a child who tied his shoes by himself. Mila blinked a few times, processing what she heard. "The subway? You?" "Yes, it was an experience." Brian tugged at his wrinkled t-shirt. "I nearly missed my stop. A lady called me a penguin, and I still don't understand why everyone runs so much." For the first time, Mila laughed. A real laugh, not a sarcastic one. "Mr. Walker, did you eat breakfast?" "Actually, no. My cook usually handles that, but today I wanted to. Try being normal." Mila finished for him, still smiling. "Something like that." She looked at him for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Come on, I'll show you where to get a decent cup of coffee around here." They walked out together, and Mila took him to a small, busy diner 2 blocks from the building. The kind of place Brian had never set foot in before. Plastic chairs, a handwritten menu on a chalkboard, and a Greek owner shouting orders. 2 coffees and 2 blueberry muffins, George," Mila shouted over the noise. "Mila, my girl?" George waved from behind the counter. "Who's the guy?" "A friend who's learning how to live in the real world," she answered, pulling Brian to a small table in the corner. Brian looked around, fascinated. The place was full of regular people. Office workers, nurses just off their shifts, students with old laptops. Real conversations, spontaneous laughter, life happening without a script. "So," Mila sat down across from him. "You really took the subway?" "I really did." Brian smiled. "And you know what? It was terrible. But also, interesting." "Interesting how?" "Well, I found out there's a whole world running while I'm stuck in my penthouse." He took the coffee George brought over. "Thank you." How much is it? $4.50, George replied. Brian almost choked, not because of the price, but because it was probably the cheapest coffee he'd ever had, and it was delicious. Mr. Walker, Mila was watching him curiously. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you know how to cook? Brian laughed, embarrassed. I know how to order delivery. That doesn't count, Mila shook her head. What about doing laundry? I have a laundry service that picks up and drops off. Clean the house? Well, you work there. Mila rested her chin on her hand, thoughtful. Mr. Walker, you're basically a big kid with an unlimited credit card. Hey, Brian protested, but he was laughing. That was harsh. It was honest. Important difference. She finished her coffee. Do you really want to change? I do. Then come to my place tonight. Brian almost dropped his cup. Your place? I'm going to teach you how to cook. Mila stood up. And no, it's not a romantic date. It's a basic survival class for grown-ups. At 7 p.m., Brian stood at Mila's apartment door in Queens, holding a bouquet of flowers he'd bought on the corner. When she opened the door wearing jeans and a cat print t-shirt, he felt completely out of his element. Flowers? She raised an eyebrow. It's polite to bring flowers when you visit a lady's home. Mr. Walker, this is a cooking class, not a date. But she took the flowers, smiling. Thank you. They're lovely. The apartment was small but cozy. Simple furniture, family photos on the walls, books stacked in every corner. Brian felt like he'd stepped into a different world. Is your mom doing okay? He asked, noticing the photo of an older woman on the side table. Better, thank you. Mila put the flowers in a vase. She's at my aunt's tonight. Said she didn't want to get in the way of my mission to civilize the millionaire. Brian laughed. She knows about me? My mom knows everything. Moms have superpowers for that kind of thing. Mila headed to the kitchen. Come on, let's start with something simple. Scrambled eggs. I can fry an egg, Brian said, confident. Can you? Sure. How many times do you think I've seen it in movies? Mila crossed her arms, amused. Movies don't count, Mr. Walker. Show me. She handed him a frying pan, oil, and 2 eggs. Brian looked at the ingredients like they were lab equipment. First, turn on the stove, Mila instructed. Brian turned the knob. The flames jumped up too high. Lower, Mr. Walker. The idea is to cook, not set my kitchen on fire. He adjusted the flame, poured in the oil, and waited for it to heat. So far, so good. Then he picked up the first egg. How do I crack this without making a mess? On the edge of the pan, gently. Brian hit the egg on the pan. Too hard. The shell shattered, falling into the hot oil along with the whitened yolk. Oops. Mr. Walker, the egg should come out of the shell, not bring it along for the ride. Mila was clearly having fun. Let me try again. The second egg was worse. Brian missed the pan entirely, letting the yolk and white run down the counter. Mila couldn't hold back her laughter. You're a public hazard in the kitchen. It's not as easy as it looks, Brian protested, cleaning up the mess. Come here. Mila came closer, picking up another egg. This is how you do it. She stood beside him, guiding his hand to crack the egg properly. Brian caught a whiff of her soft perfume, noticed how her fingers were delicate but steady. For a moment, he completely forgot about the egg. Mr. Walker, are you paying attention? Sorry, it's just, you smell really nice. Mila blushed slightly, but didn't step away. Focus on the food, Mr. Walker. After half an hour, 3 wasted eggs, and a kitchen that looked like a war zone, Brian finally managed to make something that vaguely resembled scrambled eggs. Not terrible, Mila said after tasting it, trying not to make a face. Don't lie to me. You said it's important to be honest. It's pretty bad, she admitted, laughing. But it was your first try. Everyone starts somewhere. They sat at the small kitchen table, eating slightly burned eggs and talking. For the first time, Brian felt relaxed. He didn't need to impress anyone. He didn't need to be Brian Walker, the millionaire. He could just be himself. Mila, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you helping me? I mean, after what I did. Because everyone deserves a second chance, she said, looking at him. And because, for the first time, I see that you're really trying to change. How do you know? Mr. Walker, a man who's never taken the subway in his life and agrees to be humbled by scrambled eggs, is clearly going through a transformation. She smiled. Or having a nervous breakdown. I'm not sure yet. Brian laughed, and for the first time in weeks, he felt genuinely happy. Thank you for giving me this chance. It's too early for that. Tomorrow we're working on laundry. That might be dangerous. For your clothes, absolutely. They laughed together, and Brian realized something had changed between them. The boss and employee wall was coming down. They were just two people getting to know each other. When Brian got up to leave, Mila walked him to the door. "Mr. Walker? Yes? My name is Mila. You can just call me Mila. Only if you stop calling me Mr. Walker. My name is Brian." "All right, Brian." They looked at each other for a moment. The air between them felt different. Good. Brian leaned in slightly, and Mila didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle, hesitant at first, then more certain. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Good night, Mila." "Good night, Brian." Brian walked down the stairs of the building, feeling like a completely different man from the one who had come up. For the first time in his life, he had earned something that truly mattered. 2 days later, while working in the office with a smile he couldn't hide, his phone rang. A text message from a number he knew very well but had hoped never to see again. "Hi, love. I'm back in New York. How about dinner tonight? I have news. Kisses, Bethany." Brian stared at the message from Bethany Ashford for at least 5 minutes, as if the words might magically change on the screen. They didn't. His ex-girlfriend was back, and he knew exactly what that meant: trouble. Bethany had a special talent for showing up at the worst possible times, like a sudden tropical storm that destroys everything in its path. They had broken up 8 months ago, after 2 years in a relationship that felt more like a business deal between two fortunes. Brian was trying to decide whether to reply or pretend his phone had vanished into space when he heard a knock on the office door. "Come in," he said, quickly putting the phone away. Mila walked in with her cleaning supplies basket, smiling in that way that made Brian's heart race since their kiss 2 days ago. "Good afternoon, Brian. How are the scrambled eggs? Did you manage to cook without setting the kitchen on fire?" "Actually, I tried again last night," he smiled back. "Only called the fire department once, so I think I'm getting the better." Mila laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." She began organizing the papers on his desk. "But at least you're trying." It was in these moments that Brian realized how much his life had changed. 2 weeks ago, he barely noticed Mila. Now, she was the best part of his day. "Mila, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? Somewhere simple, no fancy champagne or tuxedo waiters." "You know a place like that?" she teased. "Well, George recommended a pizza place in Brooklyn. Said they make the best homemade pizza in town." "George from the diner?" Mila looked genuinely surprised. "You went back there?" "Every day this week," Brian admitted, a little embarrassed. "The coffee is really good, and he taught me a few Greek phrases." Mila gave him a look Brian couldn't quite read. "Maybe affection?" "All right, but I'm paying for my half." "Mila, don't argue, it's half or I'm not going." Brian was about to respond when he heard the sound of high heels in the hallway, expensive ones, clicking with the confidence of someone who always knows where she's going. He knew that sound. The door opened without warning, and Bethany Ashford walked in like she owned the place. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a red dress that cost more than Mila's monthly salary, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Brian, darling." She walked straight toward him, completely ignoring Mila. "You didn't answer my message. I thought maybe you were just too busy to check your phone." Brian stood up automatically, more out of reflex than courtesy. "Bethany, I wasn't expecting you here. Surprises are more fun, don't you think?" Bethany finally noticed Mila, who had stopped organizing papers and was watching them with quiet curiosity. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company." The way she said company made Brian shrink a little inside. "Bethany, this is Mila." "Mila? Bethany." Mila stepped forward and offered her hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Ashford." Bethany looked at the extended hand like it was a poisonous snake, but gave it a quick shake. "Pleasure's mine, dear." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "You must be new here. I don't remember seeing you around during my past visits to Brian." "I've been working here for a few weeks," Mila answered simply. "Ah, I see." Bethany glanced around as if inspecting the decor. Brian has always been generous with the staff. It's admirable how much he cares for the less fortunate. The condescending tone made Brian shift uncomfortably in his seat. Mila, however, kept her expression neutral. "It's true. He's been teaching me a lot about generosity," Mila said while putting away the cleaning supplies. "I'll leave you two to talk." "See you later, Brian." She walked out, closing the door gently behind her. Brian watched her go, with the strange feeling that he had just lost something important. So Bethany sat in the chair across from his desk, crossing her legs in a practiced motion. "She seems interesting." "Bethany, why are you here?" "Straight to the point," she laughed. a crystalline sound that used to charm him but now felt fake. I was in Paris, closing a few deals with the gallery, when I realized how much I missed you. Brian didn't buy it. Bethany Ashford never missed anyone or anything, unless it served her interests. 8 months is a long time to miss someone. Oh, come on, you know how it is. I needed space, you needed space. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. But now I'm back, and I think we've both grown. Maybe it's time to try again. Bethany, remember the Blackstone party last week? She interrupted. Jennifer told me you didn't even show up. That's not like you. And the Harrison Foundation charity dinner? You skipped that too. Brian had completely forgotten those social events. Lately, his idea of fun had become drinking cheap coffee with George and learning not to burn eggs. I've been busy. With what? Bethany glanced around again. Brian, you can't seriously be thinking about, well, anything with that girl. What girl? The employee, she said, like referring to something unpleasant. I saw the way you looked at her. Look, I get it. Sometimes we need a distraction, something outside our world. But you're not seriously considering this as something real, are you? Brian felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. What exactly are you implying? Brian, really? Bethany laughed as if he'd told a joke. She cleans your house. You have nothing in common. What would you even talk about over dinner? Cleaning supplies. You don't know her. I don't need to. Bethany stood and walked around the desk to stand closer to him. I know you. I know our world. Remember how good we were together? The trips, the parties, the deals we closed at social events? She placed a hand on his shoulder, a familiar gesture that used to comfort him. Bethany, there's an art exhibit opening tonight at the Met. Everyone who matters will be there. She leaned in, whispering in his ear. We can show up together, let people know we're back. Just like the old times. Brian closed his eyes for a moment. The old times. Parties full of people he barely knew, empty conversations about money and status, relationships built on appearances. A month ago, that had been his whole life. I don't know if that's a good idea. Of course it is, Bethany smiled, confident. Wear your black tux, the Armani one you wore to last year's gala. I'll pick you up at 8. She walked to the door, paused, and looked back. And Brian? Maybe it's best not to mention your experimental phase to our friends. They wouldn't understand. After she left, Brian remained alone in his office, feeling like 2 worlds were colliding in his mind. On one side, Bethany, and everything she represented, his past, his social circle, the life he had always known. On the other, Mila, and the possibility of being someone different, someone better. An hour later, he found Mila cleaning the reception windows. She seems interesting, Mila said without looking at him. Mila, about what she said. You don't have to explain anything. She dipped the cloth into the cleaning solution. Everyone has a past. But that's not it. Bethany and I broke up months ago. And now she's back. Mila finally looked at him. It happens. Brian noticed something different in her tone. More distant, more formal. Mila, what's happening between us? Brian, she sighed. Look, I really liked getting to know you better. I liked seeing that you could be different from what I imagined. But maybe we're fooling ourselves. What do you mean? We come from completely different worlds. Your ex made that pretty clear. She went back to cleaning the glass, avoiding his gaze. And maybe she's right. Don't say that. Brian, you go to parties that cost more than my yearly salary. You have friends who probably don't even know people like me exist. She stopped cleaning. I can't compete with that. You don't have to compete. Yes, I do. She stepped back when he tried to get closer. And the truth is, you'll have to choose too. You can't live in both worlds forever. Mila finished putting away the cleaning supplies and headed to the elevator. Mila, wait. Good luck at the exhibit tonight, Brian. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. The elevator doors closed, and Brian was left alone in the reception area, realizing he had just lost something far more valuable than any piece of art he'd see that night. Over the next 3 days, Brian Walker found out what it really meant to miss someone. It wasn't like missing an expensive item he'd lost or a trip that got canceled. It was a physical feeling, like a part of him had just disappeared. Mila avoided crossing paths with him in the hallways. When they did run into each other by chance, she greeted him politely. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," and moved on, like he was just another fancy piece of furniture in the penthouse. That return to formal treatment hurt more than anything she could have said. Brian had gone to the exhibit at the Metropolitan with Bethany, as promised. He spent 3 hours listening to pretentious comments about art, pretending to care about conversations on investments in French vineyards, and smiling for photos that would show up in the social section of the papers the next day. In the middle of the party, while Bethany chatted with a group of friends about her latest purchase on Fifth Avenue, Brian found himself wondering how Mila would react in that environment. She'd probably make a clever comment about how people spent more on dinner than some families did in an entire month. "Brian, darling, are you listening?" Bethany touched his arm, pulling him back to reality. "Sorry, I was thinking about work." "Work? At a party?" She laughed, shaking her head. "You really need to learn how to relax again." But Brian couldn't relax. He couldn't pretend he was having fun, couldn't pretend that any of this still made sense to him. On the fourth morning without a real conversation with Mila, Brian was in his office trying to focus on financial reports when Bethany showed up again. This time, she brought 2 friends, Jennifer Morrison and Amanda Sterling, 2 heiresses Brian had known since his teenage years. "Surprise!" Bethany entered, beaming. "I brought company for lunch." Brian stood up, forcing a polite smile. "Jennifer, Amanda, how are you?" "Marvelous," Jennifer replied, kissing the air near his cheek. "Bethany told us about the 2 of you. We're so happy." "About the 2 of us?" Brian looked at Bethany, confused. "Oh, Brian, don't be modest. Amanda sat down without being invited. Everyone's talking to you at the exhibit yesterday. What a beautiful couple you make." Brian felt a heaviness in his stomach. There was nothing official between him and Bethany, but he knew how the social game worked. Appearances mattered more than truth, and showing up together in public meant a lot more than he had intended. "Actually," he began to say, but Bethany interrupted. "Brian's always been shy about these things." She laughed, grabbing his arm possessively. "But there's no denying it, darling. The photos were in the paper this morning." She showed him her phone, and there they were, Brian and Bethany smiling for the cameras, her elegantly hanging on his arm. The headline read, "The Golden Couple is Back. Brian Walker and Bethany Ashford rekindle the romance." "Isn't it lovely?" Jennifer clapped her hands. "You 2 are perfect for each other." At that moment, Brian heard a soft knock on the door. Mila entered with a tray of coffee, clearly not expecting visitors. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company," she said, keeping her eyes down. "No, it's fine. Come in," Brian quickly said. Bethany and her friends looked at Mila like she was some curious object that had appeared out of nowhere. "Oh, it's the cleaning lady," Amanda said with fake sweetness. "How are you, dear?" "I'm well, thank you," Mila replied, placing the cups on the table with professional care. "Bethany told us about your situation." Jennifer tilted her head with pity. "It must be so hard for you, working so much to support your family." Brian saw Mila's jaw tighten slightly, but she kept a neutral expression. "I manage just fine. Thank you for your concern." "Of course you do, dear." Bethany smiled condescendingly. "And it's so admirable how Brian cares about the staff. He's always had such a generous heart." The word staff hit like a slap. Brian saw Mila tense up, but she quietly finished serving the coffee. "By the way," Amanda went on as if Mila were just part of the furniture. "Brian, did you see the Whitmores are selling their house in the Hamptons? It would be perfect for you 2 as a summer home." "Summer home?" Brian repeated, still processing the moment. "For after the wedding, obviously." Jennifer laughed. "No point in pretending you're not thinking about it. You 2 were always meant for each other." Brian looked at Mila, who had finished serving the coffee and was quietly heading to the door. Their eyes met for a split second, and he saw something that crushed him. Resignation. "Excuse me," Mila said softly, leaving the room. The 3 women kept chatting about weddings, houses, and the future, but Brian no longer heard any of it. His mind was completely focused on the look he had seen on Mila's face. It was like she had given up on any hope she might have had for them. "Brian?" Bethany touched his hand. "Are you okay? You seem distant." He looked at her, then at Jennifer and Amanda, then at the newspaper photos showing a life he no longer wanted. "Actually, I'm not okay." Brian stood up abruptly. "And I need to make something clear." "What is it, dear?" "Bethany, we're not together," he said plainly, his voice echoing through the quiet office. The 3 women stared at him as if he had just announced he was moving to Mars. "What do you mean?" Amanda blinked, confused. "We're not dating. We're not getting back together. We're not planning a wedding or buying houses." Brian continued, feeling strangely free with every word. "We went to one party together. That's it." Bethany stood up, her face red with embarrassment. Brian, don't be ridiculous. You're having some kind of moment, but I'm not having a moment. He cut her off. I'm being honest for the first time in months. Honest about what? Jennifer asked. Brian looked at the door Mila had walked through and made the most important decision of his life. About being in love with someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Bethany went pale, then red, then pale again. You're talking about the employee? She asked, in disbelief. I'm talking about Mila. Brian corrected her. And she has a name. Brian Walker, you've completely lost your mind. Bethany exploded. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, he said, heading for the door. And now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go after the woman I love. If you walk out that door right now, Bethany shouted after him. Everyone's going to know about this. It'll be in all the papers tomorrow. Your reputation will be ruined. Brian stopped at the door and looked back. Bethany, my reputation was already ruined. I just didn't know it until I met someone who showed me who I could really be. He walked out, leaving 3 stunned women behind. Brian searched the building for Mila. He finally found her on the rooftop, looking out over the city through the thick glass. Mila. She turned and he saw that she had been crying. Brian, you don't have to explain. I understand the situation. No, you don't, he said, stepping closer. I just ended things with Bethany, in front of her friends. Very publicly and very clearly. Mila blinked, surprised. You did what? I told them I'm in love with you. Brian smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. And that I don't care about newspapers, gossip, or what anyone has to say about it. Brian, she shook her head. You don't know what you're doing. Tomorrow you'll regret it. I won't regret it. He took her hands in his. Mila, these past few weeks, you've shown me there's a different way to live. You showed me I can be a better person. But your world. My world can go to hell, he laughed. Sorry for the language, but it's true. I want to build a new world. With you. Mila looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the battle happening behind her eyes. Brian, I'm graduating in 2 months, she said at last. And that's a bad thing? It's just, I can't get involved with someone who's still figuring out who they are. She sighed. You just got out of a 2-year relationship. You had a public argument with your ex-girlfriend. Your whole social circle is probably talking about you right now. Brian realized where she was going with this. You think I'm being impulsive. I think you're going through a very intense transition, Mila said, gently holding his hands. And I can't be part of your confusion, Brian, not right now. Mila, please. I need to focus on my graduation, on my future. She stepped back softly. And you need to be sure of who you really want to be, on your own. Brian felt the world fall apart around him, but at the same time, he understood the wisdom in her words. How long? He asked. I don't know. She gave a sad smile. Maybe when you're sure you can live without needing anyone's approval, we can try again. She walked to the door but stopped before leaving. And Brian? Thank you for standing up for me downstairs. That meant a lot to me. After she left, Brian stayed alone on the terrace, looking out at a city that suddenly felt different from how it looked that morning. He was sure his phone was already buzzing with calls from shocked friends, that tomorrow's newspapers would be ruthless, that his social life would never be the same again. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care at all. The following days were exactly as Brian had expected, only worse. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, but he refused to answer. The society pages had a field day with the story of the scandalous breakup between him and Bethany Ashford. Walker shocks by trading heiress for employee, one headline read. The end of a fairy tale, another one claimed. Brian threw every paper in the trash without reading the full articles. For the first time in his life, he didn't care what people were writing about him. What really bothered him was Mila's absence. She had asked for a temporary transfer to work on another floor of the building, saying it would be more professional to keep some distance until things settled down. Brian tried to respect the space she asked for, but it was harder than he imagined. He woke up thinking about her, spent the day wondering how she was doing, and fell asleep remembering how she laughed at his kitchen disasters. It was during one of those sleepless nights that Brian had an idea. If Mila wanted him to prove who he really was, that's exactly what he would do. But not with words or romantic gestures, with real action. The next morning, he called his personal attorney. Richard, I need to set up a foundation. What kind of foundation, Mr. Walker? to help low-income college students. I want to offer scholarships, support for family medical expenses, mentoring programs, whatever it takes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "May I ask what led to this decision?" Brian smiled to himself. "Let's just say I met someone who showed me the real value of education and hard work." For the next 2 weeks, Brian threw himself into the project like he had never committed to anything before. He spent days studying other foundations, consulting education experts, and setting scholarship criteria. He wanted it to be perfect. He wanted it to truly change lives. Most of all, he wanted to do it in secret, until everything was ready. Meanwhile, Mila was going through the strangest days since she'd started working at the company. Not seeing Brian every day left a space she hadn't expected to feel. Working on the 15th floor, taking care of the manager's offices, she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. How was he handling the scandal in the news? Was he regretting his impulsive decision to break up with Bethany so publicly? "Mila, are you okay?" asked Sarah, one of the receptionists. "You seem a bit distracted these days." "I'm fine," Mila lied, forcing a smile. "Just focused on school, graduation's coming up." "Oh, that's right, how much longer?" 6 weeks. 6 weeks that felt like forever, and at the same time like nothing. Mila had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that it was so close, she felt a strange kind of anxiety. Part of her knew it was because of Brian. They had drifted apart just when things were starting to get interesting between them. "Are you having a graduation party?" Sarah asked. "I don't have money for a party," Mila laughed. "I'm just going to graduate, take a picture with my mom, and that's it. Simplicity is the key to happiness." But even trying to keep her good mood, Mila couldn't stop thinking about Brian. Was he okay? Had he gone back to his world of parties and shallow living? The answer came unexpectedly 3 days later. Mila was having lunch at George's diner when she overheard 2 women talking at the next table. "Did you see the pictures of Brian Walker at the Sterling Industries party last night?" one of them said. Mila tried not to listen, but it was impossible. "I did. He looked amazing, as always. And he was with that gorgeous brunette, Amanda Sterling. Looks like he got over that whole thing with the ex-girlfriend and the employee pretty fast." "Of course he did. Men like him don't stay single for long." Mila felt her stomach tighten. She grabbed her phone and, against her better judgment, looked up news about Brian Walker. It didn't take long to find something. There he was, looking sharp as ever, smiling for the cameras next to Amanda Sterling at a corporate event. The photo had been taken the night before. Mila stared at the image for a long time. Brian looked exactly the same. Expensive suit, shiny watch, perfect smile for the cameras, as if nothing had changed. Of course, she thought, he went back to his world. It was only a matter of time. She put her phone away, completely lost her appetite, and went back to work with a hollow feeling in her chest she tried to ignore. What Mila didn't know was that Brian had only gone to that party because his lawyer insisted it would be important for networking for the foundation. He'd spent the whole evening bored, counting the minutes until he could leave, and had posed for exactly 3 photos before heading out early. Amanda Sterling had tried to flirt with him all night, but Brian barely noticed. His mind was completely occupied with the foundation details, and missing Mila. The next morning, Brian was in his office reviewing the final documents for the foundation when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Walker, Mr. Richard Hoffman is here." The lawyer walked in with a folder full of papers and a satisfied smile. "Brian, I've got great news. The Walker Foundation for Education is now officially established. All documents are approved. The initial funds have been transferred, and we can start operating next week." Brian felt a wave of satisfaction like he had never felt before. It wasn't the satisfaction of closing a big deal or buying something expensive. It was something much deeper. "Great. What about the scholarship criteria?" "Exactly as you requested. Low-income college students with good academic performance who also work to pay for their education. Priority goes to those supporting their families as well." Brian nodded. Those criteria described Mila perfectly, although he hadn't mentioned that to the lawyer. "And the anonymity?" "Guaranteed, at least for now. The scholarships will be awarded in the foundation's name, with no mention of you as the founder. If you want to make it public later, we can do an official announcement. For now, keep it private." Brian placed the papers in a drawer. "And Richard, I want the first scholarship to go to a specific student." Over the next few days, Brian felt more motivated than he had in years. He was finally doing something that mattered, something that could truly change people's lives. At the same time, he missed Mila constantly. He wanted to tell her about the foundation. He wanted to see her reaction, to share this accomplishment with someone who would really understand what it meant. But he had promised to give her the space she asked for. And if he had learned anything from her, it was how important it was to keep your word. Mila, meanwhile, was deep in her final preparations for graduation. Between work, studying for her last exams, and taking care of her mother, she barely had time to breathe. But whenever she saw a photo of Brian in the papers or heard someone mention him, she felt a tug in her heart. Part of her was hoping, well, she didn't even know what exactly. Maybe a sign that he still thought about her. But the weeks passed, and nothing happened. It's better this way, she told herself. He went back to his world. I'm focused on my future. Things are back to normal. Except nothing felt normal. George's diner didn't have the same charm without Brian asking questions about the menu. The scrambled eggs she made at home reminded her of the laughs they shared in her kitchen. Even cleaning the company's offices had lost part of its meaning. One morning, 5 weeks before graduation, Mila got an unexpected call from the university's administrative office. Miss Lester? We have some good news for you. You've been awarded a scholarship that will cover all your expenses for the final semester, including the graduation ceremony. Mila almost dropped the phone. What? I never applied for any scholarship. The Walker Foundation for Education selected you based on your academic performance and financial situation. Congratulations. Mila was silent for a long moment. Walker Foundation. Brian's last name. Could it be? Can I ask who's behind the foundation? She asked. That information is confidential, miss. I can only tell you it's a serious organization focused on helping students like you. After hanging up, Mila stood frozen in the middle of the room, trying to process what she had just heard. It could be a coincidence. Walker was a common last name. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled for real. 3 days after the scholarship news, Mila was still processing it. Every time she thought of the Walker Foundation, she felt a strange mix of hope and doubt. Could Brian really have started a foundation? Or was this just another way to control her life with money, like he had done with her mother's medical bills? She decided not to get her hopes up. After all, the photos in the papers clearly showed him back in the world of parties and socialites. The scholarship might just be a coincidence in names. Mila? You look like someone who just won the lottery but isn't sure if the ticket's real, George said at the diner, handing her the usual cup of coffee. That's actually a pretty accurate description. Mila chuckled, stirring in the sugar thoughtfully. Sometimes good things in life come with fine print. Or sometimes we just make things more complicated than they need to be, George said while wiping down the counter. You got a scholarship because you earned it, kid. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. Mila smiled. George had a way of making life's most complicated moments feel simple. Meanwhile, across town, Brian was having the most intense week of his life. The foundation was up and running, but he wanted to do something special for Mila before graduation. Not just tell her about the foundation, but show her that his transformation was real and lasting. He spent 3 nights barely sleeping, planning every detail. He wanted it to be perfect. Mr. Walker, his assistant, stepped into the office. The designer you hired is here to discuss the dress details. Send him in. Marcus Delacroix was one of the most respected designers in New York, known for creating unique dresses for special occasions. Mr. Walker, I understand you're looking for something special for a young woman's graduation, Marcus said, checking his notes. Do you have any color or style preferences? Brian thought of Mila, her simple elegance, how beautiful she looked without any expensive touches. Something that highlights her natural beauty, nothing flashy or over the top. She's not the kind who likes being the center of attention. Understood. And the budget? There's no limit. But I want it to feel special, not expensive. You know what I mean. Marcus smiled. Perfectly. I'll create something one of a kind with understated elegance. Over the next few days, Brian also worked on a letter. He wrote, ripped up, and rewrote at least 15 versions. How do you put into words everything that had changed in your life? How do you explain that someone had inspired you to become a better person? He finally managed to write something that felt sincere. Mila, you taught me that a person's worth isn't in what they own, but in who they are. You taught me that real generosity doesn't come from writing checks, but from actions. And more than anything, you taught me that true love isn't about impressing someone. It's about becoming someone worthy of being loved. The foundation is just the beginning. I want to spend the rest of my life proving you were right about me being able to change." Brian placed the letter along with the foundation documents. Everything would be delivered with the dress on graduation day. Mila, meanwhile, was finishing her final days at college with mixed emotions. On one hand, she was proud to finally be earning the degree she had dreamed about for so long. On the other, she felt like something important was missing. "Are you bringing someone to the ceremony?" her best friend Jessica asked during a break between classes. "Just my mom," Mila said while organizing her books in her backpack. "She can barely walk, but she told me she wouldn't miss my graduation even if she had to come in a wheelchair." "And what about that rich guy you mentioned a few times? Brian?" Mila made a face. "That was just a phase. He went back to his little world." "Are you sure? Because the way you talk about him, it sounds like you still—" "Jessica, some fairy tales don't have happy endings." Mila cut her off, but without bitterness. "And that's okay. Real life is better than fairy tales anyway." On Friday morning, 1 week before graduation, Mila was getting ready to leave for work when someone rang the doorbell. It was a delivery person with a large, elegant box. Delivery for Mila Lester. "I didn't order anything." She checked the address. "Are you sure it's for me?" "Name and address match, ma'am, and it's already paid for." Mila signed for it, puzzled. She took the box inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a dress that literally left her speechless. It was beautiful in a way she had never seen before, not flashy or covered in sparkles. It was elegant, sophisticated, in emerald green that made her eyes stand out. The fabric was soft and flowing, and even without trying it on, she knew it would fit perfectly. Along with the dress was an envelope. Mila opened it with trembling hands and found a letter from Brian, along with all the documents from the Walker Foundation for Education. She read the letter 3 times before she could fully grasp what it meant. Brian hadn't gone back to his old world. He had created a foundation. He had spent weeks working in secret to help students like her, and he had written one of the most beautiful letters she had ever read. For a moment, Mila felt a wave of emotion so strong she could barely breathe. Then reality set in. Why now? Why just when she was starting to move on, accepting that they came from different worlds, did he show up with such a beautiful gesture? Mila looked at the dress, then at the letter, then at the foundation documents. It was beautiful. It was generous. It was exactly the kind of thing that showed Brian had truly changed. But it was also frightening. "My goodness, Mila, what dress is that?" Her mother came into the room leaning on her cane. "Where did that come from?" "From Brian." Mila held the letter to her chest. "Mom, he created a foundation to help students. The scholarship I got, it came from him." Her mother sat on the couch, studying her daughter's face. "And how do you feel about that?" Confused. Mila sat down next to her. "Mom, what if he's doing this out of guilt? What if it's just an elaborate way to say goodbye gracefully? Or what if it's because he really has changed and he's in love with you?" Mila looked at the dress again. It was too perfect to be a goodbye. It had been chosen with so much care, so much thought, but at the same time it was too expensive for her to accept easily. "Mom, I don't know if I can wear this," she sighed. "It's too much." "Too much what?" "Too beautiful, too expensive, too perfect." Her mother chuckled softly. "Mila, my daughter, sometimes you make simple things complicated. The young man gave you a lovely gift for a special occasion. If you like him, and from what I see you do, accept the gift. But what if it's a goodbye? And what if it's not?" Mila sat in silence, looking at the letter in her hands. "Are you going to wear the dress?" her mother asked gently. "I don't know." Mila folded the letter carefully. "I need to think." That night, Mila stayed up late, staring at the dress hanging in her closet and rereading Brian's letter. Part of her wanted to believe it was real, that he had changed, that the foundation was sincere, that the dress was a declaration of love. Another part was afraid to be fooled again, afraid to find out it was just another attempt to impress her with money. The next morning, she did what she always did when she felt confused. She went to work. But when she got to the office, she found out from Sarah at the front desk that Brian had left on a business trip and wouldn't be back until after graduation. Mila's heart sank. He had sent the dress and disappeared. He wasn't going to be at her graduation. He wouldn't be there to explain the letter, to talk about the foundation, to make his intentions clear. That afternoon, alone at home, Mila looked at the dress one more time and finally understood what it meant. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a graceful goodbye. Brian had created the foundation out of guilt, sent the dress as one final kind gesture, and now he was stepping away for good. It was beautiful, generous, and final. Mila sat on her bed and, for the first time since she had met Brian Walker, she truly cried. Graduation night came faster than Mila expected. She woke up that Saturday morning with a strange mix of excitement and sadness. It was the day she had dreamed about for 4 years, but she didn't feel the way she thought she would. "Mila, are you going to wear the green dress?" her mother asked over breakfast, trying to sound casual. "I don't know, Mom." Mila moved the scrambled eggs around on her plate without much appetite. "Maybe I should just wear something I already have." "Sweetheart, you spent 4 years working hard to get to this day. You deserve to wear something special." Mila knew her mother was right, but wearing Brian's dress felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit, that she still had hope. Around 3 in the afternoon, she started getting ready. She took a long shower, did her nails, tried several hairstyles. Clearly, she was putting off the decision about the dress. Finally, at 5 o'clock, she stood in front of her closet, staring at her 2 options. A simple black dress she had bought the year before, or the emerald green one Brian had picked out for her. "Mila," her mom called from the next room. "If you don't decide soon, we'll be late." "All right," she called back, grabbing the green dress. If this was goodbye, at least it would be a memorable one. When she looked at herself in the mirror after getting dressed, Mila had to admit it. Brian had good taste. The dress transformed her without changing her. It brought out her natural beauty without being too much, as if it had been made just for her, which most likely it had. "Oh my goodness, Mila," her mother appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane, with tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Mom." Mila helped her sit on the bed. "How are you feeling? Are you sure you can go?" "Sweetheart, I wouldn't miss your graduation for anything, even if I had to borrow a wheelchair." They laughed together, and for the first time that day, Mila felt genuinely happy. The graduation ceremony was being held at the Grand Ballroom at the Astoria Hotel. Right in the heart of Manhattan, it was an elegant space, with crystal chandeliers and classic decor, but not overly flashy. When Mila and her mother arrived, the room was already full of graduates and their families. The celebratory energy in the air was contagious. "Mila." Jessica ran up to her, looking lovely in a light pink dress. "You look amazing. Where did you get that dress?" "It's a long story." Mila smiled, helping her mother find a seat near the stage. "Well, whoever gave it to you has great taste." The ceremony began promptly at 7. Mila listened to the speeches from the dean, the professors, the honored guests, but her mind was partly elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the entrance, a small part of her still hoping Brian would show up. When it was time to receive her diploma, Mila walked onto the stage with her heart pounding. Not because of nerves, but because she realized this was really happening. After so many years of working by day and studying at night, she was finally graduating. Mila Charlotte Lester. Bachelor's degree in business administration with honors, the dean announced. The room applauded, and Mila heard her mother cheering from the middle of the audience. She smiled, waved, and for the first time in weeks, she felt completely present in the moment. After the formal ceremony, the social part began. Music, dancing, families chatting, photos with classmates. Mila tried to enjoy herself, but couldn't stop noticing all the couples around her. Jessica danced with her boyfriend of 2 years. Robert, one of her classmates, was with the girlfriend who had supported him through all of college. Even Kevin, the shyest guy in their group, was with a girl who looked at him like he was the most interesting man in the world. "Why the long face at your own graduation party?" Jessica appeared beside her, out of breath from dancing. "I don't have a long face." Mila forced a smile. "I'm just reflective." "You're thinking about Brian. I'm thinking about a lot of things." Jessica studied her for a moment. "You know, Mila, sometimes people do things for reasons we don't expect." "What do you mean?" "Maybe the dress isn't a goodbye? Maybe it's an invitation." Before Mila could respond, the music suddenly stopped. There was a murmur across the room as everyone turned toward the entrance. Mila followed their gaze and felt her heart stop. Brian Walker was standing at the ballroom entrance, wearing the most elegant suit she had ever seen. It wasn't flashy. It was simply perfect. He was looking directly at her, ignoring the other 300 people in the room. "Oh my goodness," Jessica whispered beside her. "Is that him?" Mila couldn't answer. She stood frozen, watching as Brian slowly walked across the room toward her. People instinctively moved aside, creating a path, but his eyes never left hers. When he got close enough for her to clearly see his eyes, Brian smiled. Not the practiced smile she'd seen in newspaper photos, but the real one. The one she had come to love. "Hi, Mila," he said simply. "Hi, Brian," she managed to reply, still in shock. "I thought you were traveling." "I was. I got back this afternoon." He looked around the hall, then back at her. "I wouldn't miss your graduation for anything in the world." The whole room was watching now, but neither Mila nor Brian seemed to notice. "You look beautiful," Brian said, and there was something different in his voice, a kind of certainty she had never heard before. "Thanks for the dress," Mila tried to keep her voice steady. It was way too pretty to turn down. "Mila, I need to say a few things." Brian stepped closer. "In front of everyone, because I want the whole world to know." "Brian, now let me speak." He took a deep breath, and Mila noticed he was nervous. 4 months ago, I was completely lost. Wealthy, yes. Successful in business, yes, but completely empty inside. People nearby started moving a little closer, curious, but still keeping a respectful distance. Then you came into my life and changed everything. Brian continued, his voice growing steadier. You taught me that money doesn't buy character. You showed me that true generosity comes from the heart, not the wallet. And you taught me that real love means becoming a better person, not trying to impress someone. Mila felt tears filling her eyes. The foundation was only the beginning, Mila. I want to spend the rest of my life proving you were right about me. That I can be better. Brian held her hands. I want to build a life with meaning. I want to help people the way you helped me. And most of all, I want to do all of it with you by my side. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the music had stopped. To everyone's surprise, especially Mila's, Brian got down on one knee, right in the middle of the room. Mila Charlotte Lester, he said, taking a small box from his pocket. Will you marry me? The hall burst into whispers of surprise and emotion. Mila heard her mother crying with joy somewhere in the crowd. She heard Jessica squeal with excitement right beside her. But all she could see were Brian's eyes, waiting for her answer. Brian, she began, and her voice cracked. I know it's crazy to ask you this, here and now, on your graduation day, he said quickly. But I've spent weeks trying to plan the perfect moment, and then I realized any moment with you is perfect. Mila looked at him on his knee in front of her, at the simple but beautiful ring in the box, at the room full of people waiting for her answer. She thought about the past few months, about the changes she'd seen in Brian, about the foundation he had created, the dress he had picked so thoughtfully, the letter that showed a genuine transformation. And most of all, she thought about how much she had missed him in these last few weeks. Get up, she said at last. Brian looked confused but stood up. People are staring, and you know how much I hate being the center of attention. Mila smiled through her tears. So? Yes, Brian Walker, she said loud enough for the whole room to hear. I'll marry you. The room erupted into applause and cheers. Brian slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as 300 people celebrated with them. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. I can't believe you did this, Mila shook her head. At my graduation, in front of everyone. I wanted them to know I'm not playing around, Brian said, cupping her face in his hands. That this is real. It's forever. Are you sure? She asked, because from now on there's no going back to your old life. My old life? Brian smiled. Mila, my life now is wherever you are. And finally, for the first time in months, Mila believed him completely. The minutes after Mila's yes were a blur of emotion, hugs, and congratulations. Jessica nearly knocked her over with excitement. Her mother was laughing and crying at the same time, and co-workers she barely knew came over with genuine smiles to congratulate her. I can't believe you actually did this here, Mila kept saying to Brian, shaking her head as she admired the ring on her finger. At my graduation, in front of half the world. I wanted everyone to know I'm serious, Brian said, gently fixing a lock of her hair that had come loose in all the excitement. Besides, you say you hate being the center of attention, but look at you now, glowing. Are you saying I enjoy drama, Mr. Walker? I'm saying you look radiant, future Mrs. Walker. Mila laughed, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in months. Future Mrs. Walker. I'm still getting used to how that sounds. We've got time, Brian said, holding her hand. A whole lifetime. The DJ, sensing the moment, put on a slow, romantic song. People in the hall naturally made room in the center, creating an impromptu dance floor. Would you like to dance with your fiancé? Brian asked, offering his hand. My fiancé. Mila repeated the word, trying out how it sounded. That's going to take a while to get used to. They moved to the center of the room, and Brian gently pulled her into his arms. Mila rested her head on his shoulder, finally letting herself relax completely. You know, she whispered in his ear, I never imagined my graduation night would end with a proposal. And I never imagined I'd propose to someone who first turned me down over expensive champagne. You remember that? Mila lifted her head to look at him. I remember every word you said to me from the very first day, Brian said, spinning her gently, especially the part about fizzy water. In my defense, it's still just fizzy water. In my defense, you were absolutely right. They laughed together, dancing as if they were the only two people in the room. Other couples joined in around them, but Mila hardly noticed. For the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Brian? She said after a few minutes. Can I ask you something serious? Of course. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? She stopped dancing for a moment. Because after today, there's no going back. Everyone's going to know. It'll be in the papers tomorrow. Your high society friends will talk about this for months. Brian gently held her face in his hands. Mila, 6 months ago, I cared about what the papers said about me. Today, the only opinion that matters to me is yours. And what if you get tired of living like regular people? She pressed. What if you start missing the parties, the fancy dinners, that glamorous life? You want the truth? Brian smiled. The last time I had real fun at a party was in your kitchen, eating burnt eggs and laughing at your jokes about my cooking disasters. Those eggs really were awful. They were terrible, but they were the best eggs I've ever had. Mila laughed, finally allowing herself to believe that this might actually be real and lasting. All right, Brian Walker. She moved in closer to him. If you're sure, then I am too. I'm sure. Then let's do this right, she said with a playful smile. But first, just so you know, I'm going to want a simple ceremony. No 500 guests or flowers that cost more than a car. Simple sounds perfect. And I'm going to keep working. I'm not going to turn into some decorative wife who spends the day at the beauty salon. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. And if you go back to being arrogant or full of yourself, I'll remind you who you were before you met me. You can count on that. Brian laughed. Any other conditions? Yes. Mila leaned in and whispered in his ear. You're going to have to learn how to really cook. I can't spend the rest of my life rescuing you from kitchen fires. That'll be the hardest part of this marriage. They went back to dancing, lost in their own bubble of happiness, when the music was suddenly cut off by a commotion near the entrance to the hall. People started turning and murmuring, creating a wave of curiosity and tension. What's going on? Mila asked, trying to see over the crowd. Brian looked toward the entrance and his face tightened. Trouble. Bethany Ashford had just walked into the room, flanked by 2 men in suits Mila didn't recognize. She looked flawless as always, but there was something different in her expression. It wasn't just anger or jealousy. It was cold determination. Brian Walker, Bethany shouted loud enough for the whole room to hear. What a coincidence running into you here. Conversations came to a complete stop. The DJ, sensing the tension, shut off the music. 300 people turned to witness what was clearly going to be a confrontation. Bethany, Brian said calmly, placing a protective arm around Mila's waist, you weren't invited. Oh, I don't need an invitation to speak the truth. Bethany stepped forward, her heels echoing through the silence. Especially when that truth might stop a young woman from making the biggest mistake of her life. Mila felt her stomach tighten. There was something in Bethany's voice that sounded different this time, less emotional, more calculated. What are you talking about? Brian asked. I'm talking about your deals with Richardson Holdings, darling, Bethany said with a cold smile. And with Blackstone Industries. Remember those companies you swore you had walked away from? Brian went pale. Bethany, don't do this. Do what? Tell the truth. She turned to Mila. Sweetheart, do you really think that man has changed? That he gave up all his shady dealings to suddenly become a saint? One of the men standing with Bethany stepped forward and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Miss," he addressed Mila, "I'm a private investigator. I have here documents proving that Mr. Koth Walker maintained investments in companies under investigation for money laundering, up until last week." The room exploded in shocked whispers. Mila felt like she'd just been punched in the stomach. "That's not true," Brian said, but his voice sounded too weak for the situation. "Not true?" Bethany laughed. "Then explain these bank transfers. Explain the meetings you had with Charles Richardson while pretending to launch your charity foundation." She tossed some photos onto the nearest table. Even from a distance, Mila could see Brian leaving a commercial building, clearly in a business meeting. "Brian," Mila turned to him, searching his eyes for some kind of explanation. "Tell me it's not true." "Mila, I can explain." "Explain?" Bethany interrupted. "How do you explain lying to her for all these months? How do you explain using a charitable foundation to clean dirty money?" "That's a lie," Brian finally shouted, his voice rising with anger. "Bethany, you're making this up." "Am I?" She turned to the investigator. "Mr. Collins, would you kindly show the documents to the bride?" The man walked toward Mila with the envelope. She looked at Brian, hoping, waiting for him to protest, to deny it, to do something to prove it was all fake. But Brian just stood there, with the look of someone who had been caught red-handed. "Mila," he tried to approach. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Mila's voice came out thinner than usual. "That you lied to me? That the foundation is fake? That you never really changed?" "The foundation is real," Brian insisted. "Mila, please, you have to believe me." But the damage was done. The entire room watched in tense silence. Mila looked around and saw the shocked faces of her classmates, the worry on her mother's face, and the barely hidden satisfaction on Bethany's. Mila began, but her voice broke. I need a moment." She ran toward the exit, leaving behind 300 people in disbelief. A desperate Brian trying to follow her, and a victorious Bethany, smiling. The graduation that should have been the happiest day of Mila's life had turned into the worst nightmare she could imagine. Mila only made it as far as the hotel hallway before her legs gave out. She leaned against the wall, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The emerald green dress that had made her feel like a princess now felt heavy. The ring on her finger seemed to burn her skin. Everything that had happened over the past few months flashed through her mind like a fast-forwarded movie. "Mila!" Brian's voice echoed down the hall. "Please wait." She turned and saw him running toward her, his perfect suit now slightly out of place from rushing. "No," she held up her hand. "I need time to think." "Mila, please, just give me 5 minutes." He stopped a few feet away, respecting her space. "Things aren't what they seem." "They're not?" She let out a bitter laugh, because it all seemed very clear back there. Documents, photos, dates, way too specific to be made up. Exactly. It's too specific. Brian ran a hand through his hair. "Mila, you know me. You know who I've become. Do you really believe I'd do something like this?" For a moment, Mila hesitated. She did know Brian. She had seen his transformation, his sincere efforts to change. But the evidence, "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. At that moment, her mother appeared at the end of the hallway, leaning on her cane, clearly worried. "Mila, sweetheart, what's going on?" Mila started, but was cut off by loud voices coming from the ballroom. "That's right. Prove it." It was Bethany's voice. "If you've got nothing to hide, show everyone." "That's exactly what I'm going to do," Brian answered firmly, his voice echoing through the hallway. Mila, her mother, and even a few hotel staff moved closer to the ballroom entrance to see what was happening. Brian was standing in the center of the room, holding his phone, now connected to the hotel's sound system. On the large screen that had been used earlier for the graduation presentation, official documents started to appear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brian said, his voice strong and clear, "I'm going to respond to each of these accusations right here, right now." The first image on the screen was an official document showing the dissolution of a business partnership. "This is the official document proving I ended all ties with Richardson Holdings on March 15th of this year." Brian pointed to the date, 3 weeks before I met Mila. Murmurs spread through the room. Bethany looked visibly uncomfortable. "That could be faked," she shouted. "It could." Brian agreed calmly. "But this can't." The next image was a screen recording of an official government website showing public business records. Here are the public records available to anyone proving I got rid of all questionable investments. He moved to the next screen. And here is the official documentation for the Walker Foundation for Education, registered with the New York State Department of Nonprofits. The investigator standing with Bethany shifted uncomfortably. As for the photos, Brian continued, his voice gaining strength, this one was taken on the day I went to Charles Richardson's office for the last time, not to do business, but to personally deliver the dissolution documents of our partnership. He showed a photo on his own phone, time-stamped and geolocated, showing the documents being handed over. And about the supposed recent meetings, Brian looked directly at Bethany. I can prove where I was on each of the dates mentioned by Mr. Collins. Mila was watching everything from the hallway, her heart beating fast. Hope was building inside her, but she still felt cautious. Brian kept showing documents, bank statements proving clean investments in the foundation, emails with lawyers, dates that matched his version of events perfectly. Mr. Collins, Brian turned to the investigator, could you explain to everyone how you obtained this seemingly confidential information? The man turned red. It was provided by the client. And who was your client? I can't reveal that. You don't need to. Brian gave a cold smile. Because I already know. He showed a series of text messages on the screen between Bethany and someone identified only as Collins. These messages were sent to me by mistake yesterday when Miss Ashford tried to send instructions to her investigator. Brian read aloud. It needs to look convincing. Use the old photos and mix them with recent dates. He won't be able to defend himself in time. The silence in the room was deafening. Bethany was pale as a sheet. That's invasion of privacy, she shouted. Not when the messages are sent to my phone by mistake. Brian put away his phone. Ladies and gentlemen, everything you saw here today was a desperate attempt to damage my reputation and destroy my happiness. He looked directly toward the hallway where Mila was standing. Mila, he said, his voice softer now, I understand if you can't forgive me for not explaining this right away. I understand if you need time to process everything. But I want you to know that every word I said about change was true. Mila felt tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. There's one more thing, Brian continued, now speaking just to her, that I wanted to tell you today, but in a more private way. A document from the foundation appeared on the screen. Mila read the name and felt her knees weaken again. Walker Lester Foundation for Education, dedicated to the memory and example of Rosa Lester, a woman of extraordinary courage who raised a remarkable daughter while facing hardship with dignity and grace. Mila covered her mouth with her hands. Her mother, sitting beside her, began to cry. The foundation bears your mother's name, Mila, Brian said, his voice full of emotion. Because it was her strength and dignity that inspired the amazing woman you became, and it was that woman who taught me how to be a better man. In the room, some people started clapping. Then a few more joined. In seconds, everyone was applauding, while Bethany and her fake investigator quietly slipped out through the back exit. Mila looked at her mother, who nodded with a smile through her tears. Go on, sweetheart. Go get your fiancé. Mila walked back into the room, still trembling with emotion. Brian saw her coming and stepped down from the small improvised stage, meeting her in the middle of the dance floor. I'm sorry, she said softly. I'm sorry I doubted you. You don't have to be sorry. Brian held her face. She was convincing. Anyone would have doubts. But I know you. I should have trusted what I knew about you. Mila, you met me as an arrogant man who tried to solve everything with money. He smiled. It makes sense that you needed proof I had truly changed, and you did prove it. She held his hands. Not just that you changed, but that you had the courage to face all this for me. To us, Brian pulled her closer, and to our future family. Our family. Mila repeated, liking how it sounded. Does that include my mom? Especially your mom. She's going to be my favorite mother-in-law. She's going to be your only mother-in-law, silly. Even better. They laughed together, and Mila finally felt like she could breathe normally again. Brian, yes? Is the foundation really named after my mom? It is, and it already approved scholarships for 50 students in the first semester. He smiled proudly. Your mom is going to have an incredible legacy. Mila looked around the ballroom, seeing her classmates smiling, her mother crying with pride, and she realized she hadn't just graduated that day. She had found her future. So? She said, playing with the ring on her finger, When are we getting married? Whenever you want. What if I want tomorrow? Brian laughed. Tomorrow might be a little rushed, but we'll make it work. I was kidding. Mila kissed him quickly. But not really. I'm not going to wait long to marry you, Brian Walker. Me neither, future Mrs. Walker. Me neither. And finally, after all the misunderstandings, doubts, and obstacles, they were exactly where they were meant to be, together, with the truth between them and a bright future ahead. 6 months after the graduation that almost turned into a disaster, Mila Walker, she was still getting used to her new last name, woke up on a Saturday morning to the smell of something burning coming from the kitchen. Brian Walker, she shouted, jumping out of bed. If you set our kitchen on fire again, I'll file for divorce before we even hit 1 month of marriage. His voice came from downstairs, slightly embarrassed. Technically, it's not on fire. It's just very toasted. Mila ran down the stairs of the new house they had bought in Brooklyn. It wasn't a penthouse like Brian's old place, but it was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard where she planted tomatoes, and a big kitchen, just right for her husband's culinary adventures. In the kitchen, she found Brian standing at the stove, holding a spatula like a weapon, staring at what used to be pancakes. Mila, in my defense, the recipe didn't say that medium heat means different things on different stoves. Brian, sweetheart, she kissed his cheek, trying not to laugh. Medium heat means the same thing on every stove. The difference is that you have a special gift for turning anything into charcoal. At least I'm consistent. He scraped the burned pancakes into the trash. Want me to order breakfast from George's? I want you to keep trying. Mila pulled out the ingredients again. Because when we have kids, they'll need to know their dad at least tried not to starve them. When we have kids... Brian froze mid-movement, smiling. Is this your way of telling me something? Not yet. She blushed a little. But someday. And when that day comes, you'll need to know how to make pancakes without burning the house down. They spent the rest of the morning trying to make a decent breakfast. Brian managed to make pancakes that were only slightly burned, which for him was practically a culinary masterpiece. You know, Mila said, eating a pancake that still tasted a bit like smoke. I never thought I'd spend Saturday mornings teaching a former millionaire how not to burn the kitchen down. Former millionaire? Brian pretended to be offended. I'm still technically a millionaire. I've just changed how I use the money. And it was true. Over the past 6 months, Brian had completely transformed his life. The foundation now served more than 200 students. He had sold the penthouse and invested the money in educational programs, and he spent more time in public schools than in private clubs. Speaking of the foundation, Mila wiped her hands on her apron. How was the meeting yesterday? Brian's face lit up. We approved scholarships for another 50 students for next semester. And remember Jessica Martinez, that girl from the Bronx we met last month? The one who wants to be a doctor? She got accepted into Columbia. Full scholarship. Mila felt her eyes fill with tears. Those were the kinds of stories that made all the work worth it. That's amazing, Brian. It's just the beginning. He held her hand. Richard said if we keep this up, we might be able to open a second office for the foundation next year. Mila watched her husband talk about the foundation with a passion she had never seen in him when he talked about business or money. It was like he had finally found his purpose in life. You're happy, aren't you? She asked. Mila, a year ago, I used to wake up every day, not knowing what my life was even for, Brian said as he kissed her hand. Now I wake up next to the woman I love, in a house that truly feels like home, and I go to work knowing I'm actually making a difference in people's lives. How could I not be happy? That afternoon they went to visit Mila's mother, who had moved into a better and more accessible apartment in Queens. Her health had improved dramatically since she started receiving proper treatment. So, Rosa Lester said as she served tea to both of them, when am I getting some grandchildren? Mom. Mila nearly dropped her cup. What? I'm a 62-year-old woman who almost died. I've earned the right to be eager for grandkids. Brian chuckled. Mrs. Rosa, I promise when we're ready, you'll be the first to know. What are you two waiting for? A sign from heaven? We're waiting until I can cook without supervision. Brian replied, I can't risk putting children in danger. For heaven's sake, Rosa shook her head, I can teach you to cook in 2 weeks. Problem solved. Mila and Brian exchanged amused looks. In the past few months, Rosa had become not only his mother-in-law, but something like a second mother to Brian. She was the one person who could make him follow orders without a fight. 2 hours later, on their way home by subway, Brian was now practically an expert in public transportation. Mila rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how much everything has changed," she said, looking out the train window. "A year ago, I was cleaning your penthouse, and you didn't even know my name. I knew your name." "No, you didn't." "Well, I was about to find out." Mila laughed. "Brian, you called me the new hire for 2 weeks. In my defense, I was going through an existential crisis. And now? Now I know exactly who I am," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I'm the man lucky enough to be married to the most amazing woman in New York." "Just New York," she teased, "in the world, but I don't want it going to your head." "Too late," Mila smiled. "It already has." 2 years later, after the wedding, on a rainy October morning, Mila was in the kitchen making coffee when she felt familiar arms wrap around her waist. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker," Brian whispered in her ear. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." She turned in his arms. "So how does it feel to be a father for exactly 3 weeks? "Terrifying," he admitted. "Yesterday, I tried changing Noah's diaper and almost had to call the fire department. It's just a baby diaper, Brian, not a bonfire. For me, anything that involves folding fabric into a specific shape is an engineering challenge." They laughed softly, careful not to wake the baby sleeping in the next room. Noah Walker had come into the world 3 weeks earlier, a healthy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. Brian had cried more than Mila during the delivery, and ever since had lived in a constant state of awe over his son. "You know what's funny?" Mila asked, cuddling into her husband's arms. "What? If someone had told me 2 years ago that turning down a millionaire's offer for expensive champagne would change my whole life, I'd have thought they were crazy. And if someone told me that an employee who compared my champagne to fizzy water would become my wife and the mother of my children, I'd have had them committed. But that's exactly what happened." "That's exactly what happened," Brian agreed. "And you know something, Mila?" "What?" "Champagne still tastes like fizzy water." Mila burst into laughter. "I can't believe you admitted that." "I'd admit anything to you, even that your scrambled eggs are better than mine. My scrambled eggs are way better than yours. That's not an admission, it's scientific fact." At that moment, they heard the baby crying from the next room. "I'll get him," Brian said. "No, let me. You handled the 2 a.m. shift. Let's go together." They walked to the baby's room together, which was simple but lovingly decorated. Brian picked up Noah, and the baby stopped crying immediately. "He adores you," Mila said, smiling. "It's because we're alike. 2 guys lucky enough to have you in our lives." Mila looked at her husband holding their son, and her heart filled with a happiness so deep it almost hurt. "Brian? Thank you." "For what?" "For proving that people really can change. For showing me that fairy tales do exist. They're just not what we expect." "Mila, you're the one who changed my life," Brian said, gently rocking the baby. "You taught me that real wealth has nothing to do with what's in the bank. And you taught me that sometimes it's worth giving someone a second chance. Even when that someone almost burned down the house trying to fry an egg." "That's exactly why," Mila said, kissing her husband and son. "It means I'll always have funny stories to tell." That morning, while they had breakfast with Noah sleeping in Brian's arms, Mila looked around the kitchen of their small Brooklyn home. There was no Italian marble or fancy chandeliers, but there was something far more valuable: love, laughter, and a family built on trust and mutual growth. And as the morning sun came through the kitchen window, shining on a family that had come together in the most unexpected way, Mila knew they had found something money could never buy. True love, built on respect, growth, and the courage to become better people for each other. What did you think of Mila and Brian's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to follow all of our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking right here on the end screen.